I'm here as ever with Anne Laure Jackson. Hello, Anne.
Hello, it is lovely to be with everybody. Hello.
We've been chatting for nearly 2 years, and I don't know, is it Anne? Is it Anne Laure? Or is it Anne Laure Jackson? Where does the law, which bit is it tied to, or is it not?
Oh, well, herein lays the story. Let's start with that one then. Okay. So, yeah, growing up here on Jersey, I was always Anne, and then my former name, Jackson's my married name. So then I went away to university to study occupational therapy, and there were loads of Annes in the class, and Laure is my middle name. So it just seemed to make sense that then I should become Anne Laure, and also because I was starting to do more stage work. So I recorded a couple of albums because I love to sing. I grew up on stage until kind of God showed me otherwise, and then I thought, no, that's not really me anymore. But the Anne Laure stuck because it was easier then to be introduced. People knew who you were. It was something that was quite significant. Now, at that time at university, I put a hyphen in there because to make it again more distinctive, that all you needed was the Anne Laure, and then you could leave the Jackson aside. And then I just that sense of wanting to be more authentically who I am supposed to be, that I thought I can still stick with the Anne Laure because actually I really like that, and it's really nice to be connected the same way that Santé is the business name, Anne Laure is the French version, but I've taken the hyphen out. So Laure is still my middle name, but I use it with my first name to introduce myself so that people know, people know who you're talking about. Oh yeah, she's the sensory one, or she's the singer, or she's the whatever. But yeah, so therein lies the story. You never know when you're going to ask something quite what you're going to get at the end of it, but that's why. So it's Anne Laure Jackson. I'm introduced as Anne Laure, but then often converted to just Anne because that is actually technically my first name.
How many people make it into Laura? Because that's when my brain was, I thought, have I spelt this wrong? When I first read it, I thought, is this a misspelling? Have I got it wrong? I thought, well, no, there's some French in a history, so maybe this is a French thing. But do you get introduced as Anne Laura quite a bit as well?
Yeah, I do, or Laura Ann, and it's just like
Okay. I don't know why that question popped in. I just thought, where's the connection? But I like, this is the thing about asking questions, is if you're going to ask a question, wait for the answer
Yeah.
because it's exciting.
Just never know. And also because my husband thought I was Laure Jackson. He thought that was my surname. He thought I was Anne Laure Jackson. This is like, no. But hey.
Right, we're clearing up life one problem at a time. Now, I was saying just before we started recording that I think we should set up a bureau of motor design for like trucks and cars because we've touched on it a few times because let's be honest, cars are a part of our life.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Whether they should be is a whole other question, but they are. They just are. So we have another question for you on vehicles,
Okay.
basically. So I thought, hey, this is fun. I read a story about electric vehicles causing motion sickness more than might be expected because they are often smoother to drive. And I guess the important part is silent. But apparently, that silence and the lack of vibration could be confusing the brain and causing motion sickness. Is this true? And why would a lack of noise or vibration cause motion sickness? And that's from Anonymous.
That is another brilliant question. Oh, I love these questions. Please keep sending them in. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Again, will depend on somebody's sensory thumbprint, how it is unique to them. But auditory information, I think we'll go with the auditory first because that is the most significant difference between a typical car and an electric car. Because our hearing is directly next to our vestibular system, which tells us whereabouts in space we are. It picks up movement when we're moving through space, if we're moving up, if we're moving down, if we're twisting, if we're tilting the head, if we're spinning. Whatever position our head is in is picked up by the vestibular system. But because it's intimately linked, so one's in the middle ear and one is in the inner ear between hearing and the vestibular system. And the same fluid goes around both parts of our anatomy, although the receptors are slightly different within that. Difficult to explain unless you've got a visual in front of you, but you kind of get the essence, hopefully. But so the thing with vestibular and sickness is that it's really helpful if all your senses are telling you the same thing. So when we have the conflict between reading something. If your eyes are focused, but your vestibular system is telling you that you are moving, the brain gets a little bit uneasy and just, starts to get a bit sick. The same way with your hearing system. We don't really normally pay attention to our hearing and what it's picking up, but it really does give us that sense of spatial awareness and where we are. And when you don't have that, or when the sounds are different to how we've been trained to hear, it's only in the last few years that anybody has got used to an electric sound. So if you were growing up as a baby, you would have been in a car and your ears would have learned what the different sounds mean. As the engine starts revving, as you start to get faster, your brain has associated all of those memories with the sounds. And therefore your brain knows, and it's anticipating that you're speeding up. It's anticipating that you're braking because it has associated all of that movement. It's combined auditory and vestibular input. So all of a sudden we are now in electric cars. We don't have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of all of that information in our brain. It's now really new. A year, 2, 3, 4, not many more years that I'm aware of that they've been really pushed as electric cars. So our brains aren't yet in that space of having all of that storage of what this sound actually means. So there's a conflict there, and we don't have yet a good database in our memories, in our brains for processing electric auditory input to the regular petrol or diesel cars. And also, it's just a very different experience listening to something and what it does. But our vestibular systems are still picking things up the way that they always have done. We've just got that extra complexity because it's new and our brains we haven't quite caught up yet.
Does that mean, therefore, then hypothetically, a child who's born today only knows electric vehicles won't have the same struggles with motion sickness that somebody who's never been in an electric vehicle before would have?
It's quite possible. Yeah, there will be different reasons behind, why folks get motion sickness. I think that's going to play a part for somebody, for sure, or for some people.
Interesting stuff. As I said, we should start the Andy and Anne Bureau of Motor Vehicle Design for sensory health and other stuff. I remember an advert. It was by a German maker, and the car was so silent. This lady had brought the car in. This was the advert. She brought the car into the garage. It's broken. There's a squeaking noise. They took it out, couldn't find it, and they discovered that the squeak was from her earring squeaking, which was louder than any of the noises in the car, because look at how much silence we've introduced. I remember the advert because the whole thing was this mechanic came along with a little oil can and oiled her earring.
Oh, funny. That's very funny.
There you are, completely
but
random.
You would think that would be such a positive and a real selling point, and we're realizing that not quite. I think we're still testing the ultimate and the optimal amount of sound and the optimal pitch. That's going to be interesting when they've reintroduced sounds back into electric cars. I'd like to see the research on how well people feel according to the different pitch that they've put the electric car sound in. Because I know it's a sound that they put in. It's not an automatically generated sound. There's some, we need to speak to some people and actually get that. But I would love to work on the pitch of electric cars and to get the optimal sensory health when we're in the car or when we're on long car drives.
But essentially then, therefore, we could actually say, possibly, that removing too much sound is a bad thing.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We were designed to be in noise, in nature, in an environment. And even if you're out in nature, it's very different to the city. It is much, much quieter, but it's very rarely, if ever, silent. So I don't think silence is a natural state.
So if you're thinking about somebody who has zero audio processing, I mean, whether it's a physical restriction, they literally can't hear because their ears have got some sort of damage, whether it's an audio processing issue, which they can't hear any of the noises, but people who are classed as being deaf, they're not walking around with motion sickness all the time. So therefore, or are they? But I'm presuming not. Otherwise, and that therefore means that actually it is perhaps more learned behavior than it is anything else. I
think it just shows the complexity of who we are and how we've been designed. because they're not that they are separate senses. It's just when there's a conflict. It would be interesting again just to hear, if anybody does have a hearing issue in any way, shape or form, how that affects you. But deafness is a different thing. It is an anatomical difference, which doesn't seem to affect the vestibular system, but there will be some people for whom it does, and vice versa. But they are different systems, so they're really close, but they're not that close. So I wouldn't expect the deaf population to have any extra issues with their vestibular system. Although we know those that have ear infections when they are little, that will affect or can affect their vestibular system and their coordination and what their muscle tone is like. So yeah, I just think we're really complex.
I have a friend who I'm going to email after this because she does signing. That's her job.
Right.
So she goes into all sorts of weird and wonderful situations, whether it's a hospital visit to accompany somebody or standing at the front of a conference and signing. But I can ask her, do you know if people who are physically deaf as opposed to it's a sensory issue, which is slightly different as I think I can understand now. But do you think there's more of an issue with motion sickness? Because I'm fascinated now by this because it's got my little brain wearing away and thinking, is it a learned behavior? Is it a sociological thing? Is it a physical thing? And you can tell by my questioning why you know that I'm not the doctor or the sensory health specialist.
But it's so good because you draw things out of people, and that's what I love. Because I was also thinking of we've got a program in the UK that I think is pretty well world round, but about like Strictly Come Dancing. Not that I watch it, but I'm aware that we've had various people on with various issues of various descriptions. But the tactile sense for someone whose hearing system isn't working that well, just how much more they sense the sound and can move to it through vibration. So that's the thing. It may be that also those who have an anatomical difference are more aware of the vibration of a car, of the vibrations of other things, and therefore that gives them enough information so that it doesn't lead to the same degree of sickness as it might for others. But yeah,
I'm writing a note.
You're writing a note.
So I'm going to email my friend and ask her because she'll have more knowledge than I will on that one.
Yeah, it's great.
Right. We have been working through a series of sensory healthy situations, whether it's a sensory healthy church or banking or shopping, and we've done all sorts of things. And we're continuing that cycle. But our first part of this conversation has got me thinking about sensory healthy new parents.
Oh.
Because I'm thinking about naming. Naming then took me to being a parent. So we've looked at, mums specifically. We've done some of that. We've looked at babies in the womb and how actually they can have a sensory healthy, differentiated experience based on what we're doing outside of the womb. So I'm just thinking specifically about new parents, which is one of the single most dramatic changes I think anybody can go through. Yeah. Because it isn't just the fact that you've got a baby and you've lost your sleep. It's about the weight of responsibility of the baby that if they don't have your input is going to be in serious physical health very rapidly. So I'm thinking specifically about this one because it ties in sleep deprivation. Let's call it what it is. Losing sleep is difficult. It's a form of torture for a reason. So tying in the sleep deprivation, all the physiological, if we can call it that, issues around having to work really hard, having less time for yourself and all that stuff against the emotional desire to help this poor little thing, which is not going to survive without you. So I thought sensory healthy lies for specifically brand new parents as opposed to parenting generally. Totally,
because that shock has a huge amount to do with the sensory environment of what is going on. A newborn does not respect your auditory processing. No. A newborn does not respect your tactile processing. A newborn does not respect your vestibular need or your proprioceptive need. If you need, what your muscles and your joints, if it needs held and carried, it needs held and carried. If it needs rocked, which normally involves you rocking, then that's going to affect your vestibular system. If it needs held close for being swaddling and again for regulation, that is going to affect your own tactile system. Auditory, yeah, they cry, they just go. Visual, I don't think it's too much, except for the clutter that then gets into the household because of everything that most of us get for having a newborn in the house. So you've got the buggies and you've got the extra high chairs and you've got, just a whole load of everything. The bathroom's got extra things to wash with. You've got nappies, you've got, just everything. Visual clutter is huge. So you've had this lovely grown up space and all of a sudden, visually, that changes. Auditory wise, somebody cuts through in the middle of the night during the day when you're on the phone call. There is no, you're totally not in control of the auditory environment. And as I say, all the other senses. So it is kind of an assault on the senses, should be in the most beautiful way. But for some, it is a massive struggle. It is.
I remember when our middle child was born, our next door neighbor came around the following morning saying, "How can we help you with the newborn?" We said, "How did you know?" This is like 4 o'clock in the morning. "Well, we heard the newborn baby. So we were pretty sure the baby had come because we knew you were due some point soon." And that's the thing. I mean, you're talking about not respecting the parents. It doesn't respect the next door neighbors. It can deafen a drill used on the road. The amount of impact of a little tiny thing weighing, 6 pounds is absolutely out of this world. But the reason why I thought new parents specifically is because it is a temporary time. It doesn't feel it. We know it. We've both been parents. We know it feels like it's forever. It really isn't. But this is a temporary time of your life.
It is a temporary time of your life. And it is so, so important to hold on to that. And one of the biggest things that I say to new parents is you've just got to be gentle with each other. It's when you've just created this thing because you love each other. You've got mum and dad and they're there together and they've just created this remarkable new being. And it is the most stressful thing, to move into this new phase of life. And it's just like, how did that happen? It's like, we know we're really happy, but this is also really tough. And it's just like, yes, so just be gentle because everything changes on so many different levels. And it is holding on and obviously protecting your own sensory health. When you need a break, when you need to put the earplugs in, when you need to take it in turns, when you need to call the neighbour in, when you need to call the extended family, when you need to call anybody, then reach out,
It is important to remember that this is a temporary time. It's also really important. We've talked about the importance of not comparing, which is where social media really is a negative impact on society at large, because we can see all the lovely snapshots of here they are on the beach, here they are at the car. We've missed the arguments and the row and the throwing of the sand bucket at the bin because it wouldn't fit. We've missed all that. But here's the thing: for when we had our first child, everybody said, "You will drive at 2 miles an hour on the road. You'll be terrified of everybody around you. You won't drive well." And I'm thinking, well, don't speak into my life things that you don't know. And I never, ever drove like that because I was a professional driver. So I drove with my child, as I always did, to the very high standard that I was so passionate about always driving when I was getting paid to drive. That's how I drove with my children. And people were quite shocked I didn't do the whole cautious parent thing. But I thought, well, why would I? That's quite dangerous. That's not how I normally am. And this is how I normally am. So we're all going to have those strengths that somebody else won't have. For me, driving with a newborn baby, I absolutely didn't even register that it was a newborn baby because I drove, as I always did, to a very, very high standard. Now, that's my story because I was a driver, but there are other parts of our lives where actually we're not going to have that strength, but we are going to have a different strength, which is why it's so important not to compare, and where extending a bit of grace, mercy, compassion for your husband, for your wife, that is so critical. Because I remember this really clearly, it's just coming to my mind. I remember before our third child was born, Joe and I were snapping at each other all the time. We were just short with each other. And we realized that it was nothing other than tiredness driving our short-temperedness. And we realized that actually those were the times when don't go to sleep on your anger. Actually, do you know what? Sometimes you need to have a sleep. And we realized, you know what? We're just tired. Actually, we haven't got a problem with each other. Neither of us has upset each other. We just have we're now short tempered because we're tired. And that's the other thing about this temporary time, is it affects and changes stuff dramatically that you may never have to experience again.
Yeah. I'm also working with some new mums who have tactile defensiveness. They are tactile overreactive, which means that their skin is on alert. They're the ones that don't like, or have difficult, they don't cut their hair, tags in clothes, seams in socks, funny clothing. They have to be very particular about the types of material that they use. Some are like picky eaters. So we've got the skin system, which is on high alert. It's more like, don't touch me. And they do have this little baby that needs breastfed. And so it's like, how are we going to manage that when I really don't want anything against my skin? Because it's my skin that's really sensitive, that's really, it's just, yeah, it's just on alert. That's how best we can describe it. And it's like, so when they've done everything that they can, because the little one needs as much is that, they want to parent well, they want to show the love, they want to give the nurture, and they want to give the good nutrition. And then, husband comes back and, just wants to cuddle at the end of the day. And it's just like, I have nothing left to give. I cannot stand anybody else having any physical contact with me because I'm done. My skin system, yeah, I'm just done. So that's really, really hard in a relationship. So it's making sure that we understand our own sensory thumbprints, our own sensory needs, and then can communicate it, especially to a spouse, because you need in these early years to strengthen your marriage just as much as any other time. The honeymoon period has changed. And it's like, right, okay, this is real. How are we going to negotiate, and how are we going to relate to each other in a way that we can support one another and really thrive in our marriage and thrive in our family, taking into account the different sensory needs that we all have.
And making sure you don't compare to other people, which was, I come back to the driving thing. For me, that was never an issue. I would give people lifts. I would drive vehicles and big trucks for them when they're moving house because, hey, it's no issue for me to do at all. That's
Right.
my day job. I'm driving big trucks. So, 7-ton truck, it's a baby thing. It's easy. So that was for me. But then there are other people for whom that is a big issue, but then they're great with the food. Whereas one of the things I think for Joe and I is it's not that we didn't cook, but that was an area that we didn't do quite so well, in which I know other people do fantastically well. So when I became a stay-at-home dad, I made pureed food. We never bought anything like that. I made everything because we'd struggled. It wasn't a massive strength of us. So as we got a little bit better, and again, it's a temporary time, as the children got older and they started to wean and stuff, then I could make the food for them. And it was lovely that I thought, well, I didn't do great for Joe and I, but what happened is, like you said, people came with food. Here's a bowl, here's a stew, here's a lasagna, whatever it was, they'd bring food. That was just divine. My little quick question, little point to think on that one. Just make sure you know of any allergies that can be even more temporary. For example, Joe breastfed, and she couldn't eat onion because the onion, for whatever reason, would trigger colic in our children. So we have a lasagna with onions in it. It's like, oh, we can't eat that. And we'd have to say, look, I'm really sorry. Can you just take it with you? There's no point. We're not going to eat it. So it's just, even that was temporary. That was super temporary, not for the entire breastfeeding period. It was just one of those things. And you have to be aware of that, because then the child gets colic and that's not good.
Oh, no, that's not good at all. But it's one of the loveliest things, I have to say, that the church does normally, that to be able to organize, other people to be able to bring support and help at crucial times when you need it. Mm.
And I think another part is accepting the help. I mean, you're talking about some of the mums you're working with who they have an overactive, I mean, that's how I'd word it, overreactive skin, and they just can't cope anymore. We've seen jokes and stuff on the internet, which I don't find funny. They're not funny at all. The woman's like, oh, that's it. I'm going to lock myself off. And I just think, well, that's because something has failed. If that's the norm, that's not a healthy thing. But that's where you come along to say, well, okay, so you're struggling from here a little bit. Let's get from point A to point B. So rather than just being reactive, that's it, I've had enough, to actually, I can find ways around it, which is the stuff that you do.
Mm-hmm. We have to make it, trying to help people enjoy life, regardless of what's going on and what their senses are picking up and how they're interpreting in it. It's like, how can we reframe things? How can we actually treat the systems? How can we help you manage? How can we change the environment? That's what I love to do.
And that's what you're doing. I mean, that's not the bit that I do, because I don't think I do quite so well at that as you do. Partly because you've got a bit of experience, and partly because I'm not an occupational therapist, which is a bit of a negative in that regard. But this is the thing about what I was just thinking about new parenting, because it is temporary, and even some of those temporary things are really, really temporary because they're lasting for a few weeks. You're talking about this. I was thinking about the smells of a baby. They don't respect your sense of smell when they have that first particular bowel motion, which, if you're a parent, you know the one I mean. It's very early on. That one, oh my goodness, they don't care what it smells like. I mean, that assaults every single possible sense that you have, but that's once, maybe twice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's such a one-off kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's digressing from the new parent thing. It's like having a broken leg that will affect your muscle and your muscle tone, your proprioception. These are short-term things. So there are lots and lots of things that happen that will throw out your sensory processing. But yeah, there's no doubt those early years and those early weeks in particular are something else.
They can be quite challenging. I think it's fair to say. How can we help people who are literally, we're talking about, I'm thinking like the first 3 to 6 months of a baby's life, particularly those first 3 months. They are the most, it assaults your senses the most by a million miles. You've got a new baby. You're absolutely exhausted. You're trying to learn out what a nappy is supposed to do on a child and how does that go on. You're trying to figure out feeding and toileting. You're thinking, well, they've got to sleep through the night because so-and-so's was. Actually, they're probably not supposed to sleep through the night. That's not a goal. They should be awake and eating because they're teeny tiny. So you've got all of this stuff. And then you throw on peer pressure. You've got in-law pressure, which is one of the worst cruelties I think that we can incidentally inflict on our children, because we forget that they're not receiving anything as they would normally do because they're tired. So therefore, how would you advise brand new parents to do better at simply getting through that time in terms of caring for their sensory health?
Knowing what their own needs are, owning them, being very specific, being very clear, not being ashamed whatsoever that this is the way that it is. You know what will help you most. There's always going to be a degree of pushing through and pressing through because you've got a little one who's demanding extra than you would normally. But you have to know yourself enough to be able to say, look, enough is enough. And that I need time out. If baby needs to sleep, I need to go walking because that vestibular proprioceptive input is calming for me. Or I need to go for a drive in the car because actually that is an environment that really does suit me very well. Find those things, find what works for you, because when you can look after yourself well, when you can find your own sensory health and be in as best form as you possibly can, knowing that you are going to be tired, there is going to be differences and there is going to be a degree of stress, but it is an amazingly wonderful time too. So it's just within that, find those things that bring you the pleasure and bring baby into the things that you know that are important for you, whether that be for you as a couple or whether that be just for you as mom or dad, as the individual of that child. Bring them in, take them dancing, and you dance around with them if you need to dance, or whatever it is that's, meets your needs. Meet those first, and then adapt that to provide for your little one to make sure that they are safe and fed and warm. And that's pretty much all that you need at this point, that you're there for them emotionally and that they are safe and that they are warm.
I think I know your response to this next one. I remember a time, child number one, so everything is new. They were, I think, a couple of 3 months old, and I was I'd hit a wall of exhaustion because I was a stay-at-home dad. So they're probably about 4 months old or something, and I was absolutely wiped out. I remember sort of being on the settee, and I started to think I'm going to fall asleep. Now, I knew that was not a good idea. And I also knew that my child was wide awake. And if I put them in their cot, they're going to scream. I also knew if I fall asleep, that's even worse. So I did make quite a hard decision. There's nobody else I can call at this point. There's nobody I can ring up and say help. So I put them in their cot. I knew they were going to scream and they were very, very upset. But you know what? I needed to go and close my eyes. And I had to not be responsible for them in that sense. So I went and had to lie down. And they screamed and they cried. And you know what? To this day, I think, I did the right thing, because the alternative was I knew having done some really tough jobs, I know what exhaustion I feel. I know where I can go to that because I've done those jobs. And I was at that point of thinking, I'm going to be physically unable to care for my child soon if I don't do something. Joe was at work. There were no neighbors around. There were no family members. It was me on my own. So I put my child in the cot and I went and had a sleep. And they screamed and I slept through it. And you know what? I still think that was a good thing to do because, not that I'm trying to defend it, by the way, but I still think it was the right thing to do because you know what? When you have a child, they're entering your world, you're not entering theirs. And I always think we need to remember that the child is now becoming part of your family. Therefore, they need to find their own place within yours. Now, that's going to look different when they're teeny tiny because they need to be fed. But actually, it's about creating a family. It's about realizing that this child is joining your family, not just you're entering their world. You do for a while. But I'm just curious about your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's crucial. And also the fact that although wherever we can, we are to be there emotionally. Emotional neglect is it's one of the hardest and hurtful things to brain development. So much trauma comes from that and how the neural networks develop. However, one-offs, we just need to be good enough parents. We are not going to be perfect. We're not, we're not designed to be perfect. I mean, that's why we have Christ. So it's like, but we can do the best that we can. And sometimes that just means you have to do. Yeah, you are totally right that if you did not get that sleep, you would not be good. And also you could roll over and squash baby if they weren't put somewhere safe. If you happen to fall apart, fallen asleep, and that, your own body, your own self, and you knew, although it was a horrible thing, technically if someone else was looking in on the outside, well, tough, I'm sorry, but you know that you are not going to be able to function well, and you will be able to go back and care for that child as best on a much better basis going forwards. And we're always going to do something wrong or not the best that it could be. That's life. That happens. We need to accept it, move on, and do the very best we can when we're in the best place to be able to do the best we can.
I remember hearing a wonderful story. I'm sure these are the people that set up the Alpha course and they had their baby monitor and either the batteries had gone flat or it was switched off and they popped next door, lost track of time. When they came back, the baby was screaming because the baby monitor had failed. It happened. So they didn't know they were screaming. And the thing is, it's very easy to look at that. Oh, terrible parents. Well, not really. Ordinarily, the baby monitor works. Ordinarily, I wouldn't put my child down to scream while I can have a sleep. It never happened again. It didn't happen before. It was just a set of events that happened. But actually, physically protecting your child is always going to be more important to me because physical is kind of indefinite, and you can fix the rest later. And he was very happy and very loved. It was one of those situations. But we do need to care for ourselves in order to care for others, which sometimes means I need to go and have a sleep for 15 minutes, which is all I did, and that was enough.
Yeah. And it's hard. I think messages, it's getting out slowly, and some people really embrace it and recognize that it's, looking after. I don't know if I quite like the term self-care. I use the term as an occupational therapist, self-care, like doing your washing and like looking after yourself and getting your hair washed and cut and things like that. Other people term the word self-care as about the kind of thing that we're talking about. Look after yourself first. But it is a balance of not being utterly selfish and it not being about me and it not being about vanity, but being good enough, looking after yourself so that you can be that, what I call sensory health, that calm, content, coordinated and confident. You can't be that if you're not able to look after yourself. And from that place, goodness me, you can really feed into other people so much better when you're in that healthy space.
At any other time, if he'd been asleep, he wouldn't have known. If he'd been not quite so awake and wanting attention, he'd have probably just happily played for a while. But very, very young child. And you know what? I needed to sleep. And I think it's important to recognize that if we're going to care for others, we do need to think about our own health, physical, mental well-being. It never happened again because I told Joe that night and I got a bit more rest and that was all fine sorted. But you can't control everything. And as a brand new parent, I think that's the other thing I just wanted to really briefly touch on is there's an acceptance of I can't control all this. You just, if your child wakes up at 3 and it wants feeding, then having a conversation with it is not going to do anything. No. It's going to want food. And you've just had half an hour of a screaming child. It still wants food. Just feed the child. But I was thinking about how do we accept the things that we can't change?
How do we accept?
A bit of a wider question, but it just seems relevant to ask.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. How do we accept the things we can't change? That's a beautiful prayer point, isn't it?
Well, there's that.
Definitely a phrase in there. Help me to accept things I can't change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. Letting go. I think it's a sense of we are not the center of our universe. We may feel that we are, but we're not. And I think being able to surrender and recognize that actually there are much bigger things at play, much bigger forces at play, a much bigger plan and a purpose at play. And recognize that, yeah, we are massively, significantly important in that, but we are not the center of the universe. And it's allowing, what is planned and purposed, to play out and surrender to what God has for us and the way that things are happening.
I think if we're talking about sensory health or physical health, if it's Dr. Richard Scott, there's an element of the spiritual which has to come in. There's an element of the emotional that has to come in. Because if you've got toothache, that's a physical condition. You've got pain because of a nerve, probably. Well, yes, you can go to a dentist, but that's going to affect your emotions because you're going to be agitated, short-tempered, tired, not eating. It's going to affect your malnutrition. If you've got an issue with being overreactive on your skin, that's going to affect the spiritual part of your life and the emotional part. And we cannot disconnect them just because it's convenient or as much as you want to, which is why I thought I'd ask the question, because in sensory health, as much as you can help someone process those processes, actually there's an emotional and a spiritual component, which is part of who God has made us to be.
Yeah. And that has to be when I'm communicating under normal circumstances, it's much easier if I know folks understand who God is and the role and who he is in their life, really. To be able to, everything else just becomes so much easier. Everything else makes so much sense when you've got Christ in the middle of everything, when you've got his ways in the middle of everything, and understand his designs of us and also, his plans and purposes. It's like, okay, I have to surrender this. And there's so much wisdom in the word to understand when even negative things, what seems to be negative things happen to us. We trust that all things work together for good for those who love him according to his purposes. It's always that bit at the end. We can say it's for our good, but for our good ultimately because of what he is wanting to do, what he is wanting to accomplish. So.
Thank you, Anne. I don't know why we went down that road, but I think it's important because I think it's too easy to say, oh, we'll just fix the sensory health, we'll fix the physical health. And sometimes that's maybe the most important thing to start with, but it's never going to be the entirety of what needs to be done because there's always impacts on other parts of your life. And if you're a new parent, it's temporary. It will change. And if you have to put your baby down for a cry because you need to sleep, do you know what? Once, it's okay. Because sometimes you've got to care for that child, and sometimes that means having a little bit of a sleep and try and put things in place so it doesn't happen again, because you can't control it all. If you want to connect with Anne Laure Jackson at any point in any way, easiest way to do it is to go on our website, pure247radio.org, pure247radio.org/ALJ, and that will connect you to Anne Laure Jackson for all of that. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. See you next time.